start the video real quick to make sure. So that would be, it's from there. Or no, it's playing, it'll be playing from the TV. For sure. Yeah, that's a display. So that'll be the.
You can test it by doing that.
Test. No. Hello?
All right, how are you?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I didn't want to ask everyone if
Test.
they thought that you should be
Test.
be in the class.
I don't.
No, it's fair. And I mean, it would probably end up just derailing the conversation if I said anything. Because, you know, I've already studied the whole book that they're reading.
Test. Testing.
That's good.
Awesome.
I have.
And I would pay my You want to pin ours or his?
Is anyone watching this right now? Oh. We're actually the ones doing this.
Hello.
Hi.
I think I got it figured out now.
Is it
What's
coming?
that one?
I don't know if it's coming
We're
through.
having trouble hearing you, so we're gonna try and troubleshoot it.
It's called.
Okay.
What's the guy? Oh,
Better.
I heard of that.
You can say something for us?
Can you hear us?
Yeah. Can people hear me now?
Yes, that works wonderfully.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, it's a little dark, but it's because I only have overhead lighting in my office. So.
I'm sorry if our camera is a little blurry, but we tried to do it so you could see all of this.
Yeah, I can see you. A little bit blurry. You're just like figures.
I don't know if it's the sun or.
I can probably.
Well, I got it. Does that make it any better? Is it less blurry?
Let me see. Just still the same amount of blurry.
Love.
Great.
Yeah, it's
I think it's just a focus thing.
Somebody told Jamie that we're waiting on them.
What?
Oh, we are waiting on Dr. Dow.
Oh, okay. I thought you were I thought someone said waving, and I was like, oh, do you need me to like wave?
No, you were absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Oh, I'm okay. How are you?
I'm trying to adjust it.
Oh, that's a little less blurry. That did make it a little less blurry.
I didn't do anything yet.
Oh no. I think what made it less blurry is that you're closer to it, and so it changed the focus.
Probably makes sense. Like a reference.
That looks a little bit already.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
No, it's not that bad. I can like see individual people very clearly.
So that should work.
You're the man of that now.
Well, it's nice to meet you. We're still center ambassadors who work for Alice, so
Yes.
and Dow. So
Oh, hi, it's nice to meet you too. I'm very excited to be here.
We're excited for you. For you, but
Hello.
Senna,
ready.
how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good. How's your day been?
It's been good. Taught a few classes.
Sweet. On what?
I taught 2 classes on whether astrology is a pseudoscience,
Oh, my
which was very fun.
Yeah. What did your class decide?
They decided it is a pseudoscience, but it's a pseudoscience in the same way any other like personality testing is a pseudoscience.
Mhm.
And so like, it's actually not unusual that someone would believe in one of these quote unquote pseudosciences. And then
Like
my other class was on transsexual Marxism.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
That
So it was a
paper you read? Was there a paper that you read for that?
Yeah, it was from the transgender Marxism collection that came out last year. It was by Rosa Lee. And I think it was just called Foundations for a Transsexual Marxism.
Cool.
I can send it to you if you want.
Yes, please. That would be awesome.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just make a note.
There's something you hear about on Fox News.
Yes.
Transsexual Marxism.
They're teaching to your second graders.
Yeah, I really am like, sometimes I get a little bit worried because it's like, oh no, I'm like the professor that these people are warning you about. How has your day been?
It's been good.
Yeah.
2 classes. A little bit of Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy.
Mm.
And then some phenomenology of empathy.
Oh,
Yeah.
what did you teach on empathy?
I'm teaching a book called The Phenomenological Mind, which is Zahavi and Gallagher. And
Okay.
they're talking about the problem of other minds, social cognition, like theory, simulation theory. And it's just kind of describing the history of phenomenology, like Schiller, Husserl, Merleau-Ponty, like how they approach intersubjectivity. So
yeah,
a chapter from that.
nice.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah. My philosophy of mind next semester is on empathy.
Oh, the whole semester?
Pretty much, yeah. The first third is the problem of other minds, and then we do some stuff on social cognition, and then it's mostly for and against empathy and morality, that kind of stuff. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, I at some point in the future, one of my colleagues just implemented a new neuroscience program. And he asked me to offer a philosophy of mind class to the students in the program. And because I'm the only philosopher here, right? I'm the only one who can do it, but this is not like an area where I know a lot. And so it's interesting to hear how people approach it, because I'm going to have to read a lot of syllabi to see like what is available and possible to do with the class.
Yeah, I teach in, now it's called the Study of Mind program, but we have a neuroscience program here where philosophy of mind and philosophy of science are required. So I've sort of taught philosophy of mind to basically neuroscience majors for the past like 5-6 years or something. And it has its challenges, but it can be done. I've trended more, like I've done it 3 ways, but one of them that students are really into is like an empirical aesthetics class. We did like basically neuroaesthetics for the last third. That was really cool. But yeah, there's psychology majors that like talking about moral psychology. So that's that's sort of why I do the empathy class. That's a lot of fun in that context.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, because this class will be for neuroscience students and philosophy students. And so I've got to hit a balance of things that will attract them and interest philosophers, and things that will interest people who consider themselves like more so hard scientists.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the studying consciousness, everybody's into. So when I do that, it's just like straight up all consciousness all the time. That's pretty cool. And then free will is also super interesting and really fun to do.
Yeah.
I did a neurophilosophy class, which is coming back next year actually. And that one I do like philosophy of neuroscience, like Carl Craver's book, explaining the brain. That's a really cool book. If you already do philosophy of science stuff, so you can totally get into that.
Yeah.
And then that's the first half. And then in the second half, I do stuff on free will, self-consciousness. the self.
Oh yeah.
So the self stuff. And that course is a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah.
Students from psychology and biology and stuff got into it.
Mm-hmm.
I can send you what I do, see if it helps at all.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you because I'm not going to do it until probably next spring at the earliest. Because the program hasn't even been accepted yet. Like it's going through that process right now. And so I know I'm going to have to do it, and then I'm going to have to like dedicate a good portion of like class prep time to specifically that, because it's so outside my normal repertoire of teaching.
I got you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be training myself to teach existentialism and phenomenology for the first time next year. So
Oh.
Have we not been
Yeah.
doing that in seminar already?
yes, we have. That's part of my training.
Oh,
I'm reading
I
Maryland
didn't realize that was-
Constitution. Yeah, you're my lab rat. Yeah. Well, all right, let's begin. Welcome everyone to the Wednesday afternoon discussion at the Steele Center. Today we have Dr. Nathan Duford from University of Hartford, who specializes in social and political philosophy, critical theory, feminist philosophy, has written a book called Solidarity and Conflict on Political Philosophy, and is working on a new book. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm working on a book about the sexual politics in the early Frankfurt School. So what they thought about sex, gender, and sexuality, and then doing some applications to contemporary ways that we see it. So this is actually part of that project.
Sweet. So today, Nathan will be talking about heteropatriarchal desire and authoritarian politics. Let's give Nathan a warm welcome.
All right, let me share my screen with you. This one. Okay. No, I hit share instead of present. Is this the button to present? It is. Okay. All right. So like I said, this project is part of a way of trying to recover this element of the Frankfurt School. So the Frankfurt School was writing essentially in like post-World War I up through World War II in Germany, this like Weimar period. And they continued writing after the Holocaust. But all of them are German Jews. So they were really invested in questions about how fascism and authoritarianism happens and what kinds of people are liable to follow it, as well as what living under it does to the people who live under it, right? So we become certain kinds of subjects based on the social conditions we're in. And if we're in authoritarian ones, we can take on certain kinds of qualities. So today I'm going to talk about one specific kind of person and sort of the pathologies that are generated from their authoritarianism. So when I talk about heteropatriarchal, what I'm talking about essentially is straight cis men who are invested in the project of patriarchy. And that is part of the justification for why they're heterosexual and cis, right? They think these are natural and necessary features of themselves. And because of that, they have a certain place in a social hierarchy that's higher than others. Okay, that's not moving the screen forward. There we go. All right, so just like some quick context on authoritarianism, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of minutes. So authoritarianism at base is a political structure that is based on deference to authority. This includes stuff like strict traditionalism. People should follow their traditional social roles, and a kind of conservation of past practices just because they're past practices. Law following. So there's a heightened importance put on following the law. And that means that people who don't follow the law are considered deviant in some way, or there's something defective about them because they don't follow the law. So that means people who don't follow laws in the society receive like ultra harsh punishments, not just like, oh, well, you know, you broke a rule. And authoritarianism always relies on a kind of strict hierarchical order of society. So it's impossible to have an authoritarian government or an authoritarian society that doesn't have these kind of strict roles about who should be following whose orders, right? So men should be following the orders of the government, women should be following the orders of men, children should be following the orders of their fathers, right? And so you get this kind of trickle down of authority, like deference to authority, which ultimately comes down to everyone should be following the authoritarian leader, but the way that gets filtered through social systems is part of how it gets to people low on the hierarchy. Authoritarian politics also rely on homogeneity. And this is the justification for why there are no democratic elements, or why there are anti-democratic elements. If imagine a world where we're all the same and we all believe the same stuff, right? So you can think about like a cult or a really like homogenous social group. Sometimes you might have like a club on campus that's like, all these people have all these really specific things in common. That can be used as a justification to not need to do the processes of democracy. Because if we did them, we would all agree on what the outcome should be, because we all are essentially like copies of the same kind of person. So the reason the leader gets to make these kinds of judgments is because we have no individuality, really. We all agree. And so like going through the democratic process is really just a complication to how decisions can be made, because the same decision would be made either way. So the authoritarian man is going to be the kind of figure that I talk most about, following from the prior slide. So the authoritarian man's going to be a traditionalist. He's going to believe explicitly in the naturalness and necessity of both heterosexuality and patriarchy, right? This is not just a social system among other social systems. It is natural law that things are ordered this way. In the same way that other animal species have specific types of way they develop social formations, patriarchy is ours. Right? Any deviance from that begins to look unnatural. Right? So anytime you see a commentator saying something like, feminists are ruining men, this is the type of thing they mean, right? Feminists, because they don't believe in this traditional order of society, are convincing men that they don't have the natural right to rule that they actually do have. And that's somehow perverting their masculinity, right? So there's a whole like architecture that maintains these kinds of beliefs and moves us away from anything that would detract from it. And so authoritarian masculinity is traditional or conservative. So like you can think about traditional ideas of masculinity as like strength, violence, rationality, bravery, right? Like the warrior idea. But the way that this actually works in these kinds of men, it mostly seems to be a fantasy of what masculinity was in the past, and it's not actually drawing on any given like what a man was at a specific time in history. Because if we look back through history, we would get lots of different pictures of what masculinity means and what men are and can be. So, and those will be conflicting with each other. If we look back at like the 1950s, we'll get two pictures, right? One of the pictures will be of like an upper class man who works in an office and wears a suit. He doesn't do physical labor. He does intellectual work mostly, right? So you can, if any of you have seen like Mad Men, right? That's a model of masculinity. And that model also involves treating all the women very badly, right? That all these women do as they're told effectively. But we could also look at like a working class or a lower class version of masculinity, which would involve like a physically demanding job, which would build a specific type of body, right? The type of work you do with your body will make it look different. And so you'll get a different type of body from both of these pictures. It also, these people would be more likely to like play sports and do other physical activities like that. And of course, they also would participate in this kind of domination of women who are basically the only people they have left to dominate, other than in like the US context, for example, they also would have dominated Black men and women, right? So these men are just, because they're so low on the like class scale, they'll find ways to get to tell people what to do, right? So we have these like two pictures of masculinity, and that's a problem for the authoritarian man, because we need to figure out what picture of masculinity we're trying to conserve, or what the tradition we're trying to keep really would be. In order to do that, we need to make up a kind of hegemonic sense of what masculinity is and what manhood is. So we can't have these deviations, because otherwise we have complications in what a man should be at all, right? We get some weird stuff as a result of the need to fantasize the past. So traditionally, contemporarily, lots of these types of men are obsessed with Spartan men, like Spartan warriors. And so they will like imagine themselves to be doing practices that Spartan warriors would have done. But these practices are unusual when we think about masculinity today. So one of the predominant figures who is doing this kind of warrior masculinity training, one of the things that he does and that he participates in is, I can't remember the way he puts it, but effectively what it is like having a friend who is also a man, and you both masturbate each other in order to strengthen your manhood. That's not something that most people would associate with traditional masculinity. But because in the ancient context, there would have been a lot of practices like that, you get some people trying to resurrect that and say, okay, well, if you really want to be traditionally masculine, you have to do all these really manly things. And it turns out a lot of those really manly things are things that we today would think of as gay things. So there's a lot of sort of confusion and consternation about this, because most of the men who think of themselves as traditionalists don't think about themselves as doing those kinds of things, right? They think those things are deviant and we shouldn't do that. We also get this guy on the other side of your screen. He's one of my favorites. His name is the Liver King. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Liver King.
Yes.
You are? Okay, awesome, right? That's wonderful. I often bring these things up and everyone's like, how do you find these people? It's like, well, they're out there. So the Liver King is living a not just an ancient lifestyle, but what he considers to be like an ancestral lifestyle. This is like the caveman style of living. And he only consumes meat. He does not consume fruits or vegetables. And he consumes mostly organ meat, as well as testicles, which he thinks provide him a source of great power. And all of these, he also consumes all of it raw. He doesn't cook any of this stuff. And so like, it's pretty hard, at least for me, to watch when he does these practices. But what he's trying to do is go through this like fantasized past where being a man meant hunting and eating your game like right there because there wasn't fire, right? And so he's trying to tap into an even more like, I would call it primal sense of manhood. And in part, this has to do with false ideas that we have about the past concerning hunter-gatherer societies, where in fact, most of the food came from gatherers and very little of the food came from hunters, right? So he imagines himself as this like provider and like hunter, big bad guy, when in reality, if he were that in the past, he mostly would have been fed by berries and things like that. Okay, so we have these fantasized archetypes of masculinity from the past. You'll notice both of these men are extremely ripped. Like they're very strong and showing off how physically strong that they are. And this is one of the things that the heteropatriarchal man tries to tap into, are just mostly archetypes of what we think of as masculinity. And then we fill out a past where we can put those archetypes on it. None of it's true. So we've got this kind of way of thinking about manhood that the authoritarian comes up with. So here is a set of characteristics of the right-wing authoritarian personality. This is by Altemeyer. This is based on a study that some members of the Frankfurt School did in the 1950s on the authoritarian personality. So they developed something that they call the F scale, and it asks participants questions and determines how much of an authoritarian they are. So how liable are you to participate in authoritarianism based on your answer to these questions? The F scale itself has a lot of like structural problems. And so no one can actually use it in a socio-behavioral context. So people have adapted it. And this is the adaptation that gets used most by like psychological researchers. People who have an authoritarian personality have a high degree of submission to authorities who are perceived to be established and legitimate in the society in which one lives. So they will not necessarily follow any authority. They only follow established authorities, right? So, and when they do that, they submit pretty fully to what is being told to them. This is why one way of thinking about these men is a lot of them are have traditional religious values. They follow traditional sects of religion. And contemporarily, a lot of men are joining explicitly conservative sects of religion, right? So lots of people are joining Mormonism, lots of people are joining the more traditional tendencies of Judaism, and lots of people are converting to Catholicism. All of these are about submitting to an established authority in a society where it's sort of unclear now who the established authority is. These people also are generally aggressive, but that aggression is directed toward whoever the established authority says we have a right to be aggressive to. In our contemporary society, this would be people like immigrants. There's a lot of violence against immigrants. People who are transgender are one of the sort of sanctioned subjects of violence. And in specifically some of the religious contexts, women are one of the sanctioned subjects of violence. So you can think about, like one way of thinking about this is like, who are the undesirables of a society? You're allowed to be violent toward them. And a high degree of adherence to social conventions that seem like they're endorsed by society and the authorities. And so this is sort of a really broad thing, but it also involves like adhering very strongly to your gender role. And so that means if you're a man, you need to fit all of these classic characteristics of men. You can't deviate from them. This is part of the reason why you have to be a heterosexual man, because that is the social convention that is endorsed by society and the established authorities. It's also why you need to have a certain kind of social role. You're expected to be an authority, you're expected to be a leader, you're expected to like treat other men and women in different ways specifically. So these are the elements of authoritarianism. Now, we can see how they work via these kind of traditionally masculine attributes, right? So the authoritarian man needs to fulfill all these qualities in order to be seen as following his social role. And the fulfillment of these qualities is involved in the other two elements as well, right? The aggression and dominance need to be enacted on the worthy subjects that society has decided are the right subjects of violence, right? And that means you can't be aggressive or dominant to some other men, right? The ones who are at your same social station, you need to address it downward, and specifically on the elements of society that are seen as most deviant. You also can't be emotional, right? None of this involves having feelings for anyone. And most importantly, for my purposes, is self-reliant, right? Men need to be independent and strong and in control of themselves at all times. If they aren't, for the authoritarian man, this is a real problem, right? Because they are failing at number 3 here. They are not adhering to the social convention of what a man needs to be. There's a lot of weird results from this, though. And one of them comes from desire. Desire is fundamentally about wanting something you don't have, right? When you say, I want pizza, you don't say that while you're eating pizza. Like it doesn't even make any sense to say, like, well, you're eating pizza, so why would you want it? You have it, right? And so we don't desire the things we do have, we desire the things we don't have. And that involves all kinds of desire, right? It involves our appetites, both like in terms of food, in terms of other bodily satisfactions, and in terms of our sexual relationships with others. What we are looking for from that is something we can't give ourselves, right? That also includes any kind of social affirmation that we would get. When we seek social affirmation from others, it's to build up ourselves, like a sense of self-esteem, a sense of self-worth or confidence, because we can't do that for ourselves, right? When we desire these things and we seek them out for others, we have to admit that we don't have all of the things we need, that we, in fact, are not in control and dominant and strong and self-reliant. We need things that other people have. This presents a real problem because there's two real problems, I think. The desire to be masculine or the desire of women both demonstrate that a man doesn't have all the things he needs for his masculinity. So the masculine thing, one way to think about this is the tiers of masculinity that some people have developed, like Jordan Peterson has done this, right? But there are alpha males and beta males and sigma males. And one of the things about beta males specifically is that they want to be masculine, but it doesn't come natural to them, right? This is something they have to learn. And that's one of the differences between beta males and alpha males, is that for alpha males, masculinity comes naturally. They don't have to want it, they just are it. Desiring women is a particularly difficult issue, specifically because of the heteropatriarchal aspect. These are men who need women to be dominant, right? The people they're dominant over are women. And one of the ways that they need women is to be sexually dominant over them, right? And so part of the problem then is that as a man, you have to look at yourself and say, women have something I want. And like, it fundamentally doesn't cohere with the idea that you have everything you need and that you're superior to women. How could an inferior have something you need? How could they be able to provide you with the thing you're missing? It puts you in a very like humble and submissive position. And this is one of the, like, if you've heard the term like quote unquote pussy whipped, this is part of that, right? The idea that a woman, through the desire for sex with her, gets control is part of the problem. The outcome is some really weird stuff, right? I've got a couple of examples. So part of this means that men can't show too much interest in women because then they have to just admit over and over, all these women have stuff that I want. And once you start doing that, it's like, well, why do all these women have stuff you want? Like, you're a man. You shouldn't want the stuff women have. You should want the stuff men have. And then we get back to this kind of like bizarre, homosexually tinged, mythic masculinity. And men have to affirm however they already are as the natural and masculine ideal. So one of the things that you can see from this is we have Ben Shapiro here. He's a pretty good example of this. But we have him like on the lower right hand side of the screen with this plank of wood from Home Depot. He went and bought it because someone said Home Depot was being woke and he wanted to support, or wasn't woke, and he wanted to support Home Depot in that. I think it's because they donate a lot of money to anti-gay legislators. And he was like, look at me, I shop at Home Depot. And it's like, that is like not like a traditionally masculine thing to do at the Home Depot. Like going and buying a single plank of wood is not, right? Like you're all laughing because it's like, okay, bro, what are you gonna do with one plank of wood? Like you clearly don't know how to work with your hands. You don't know how to work with wood. You're standing in a parking lot. You've got it in a bag. Like, this is not a man that you look at and you think, wow, he's being really manly. But he needs it, right? He thinks like, yeah, I am being really manly. Look at me with my wood. Because he has to affirm the way he is as a natural masculine ideal. One of the interesting things that happens with this is I've seen a lot of men lately talking about how real men don't play sports because of all of the homosocial elements of sports, right? So it's like, oh, as a man, you're just going to watch football and all these guys have their bodies all over each other and they're wearing skin tight clothes and they all have these like rippling muscles that you watch as they move. Like that's gay, right? And so you get these kind of weird flips of what masculinity is based on the way that the person needs to naturalize their own masculinity, right? So the people who are like, it's not masculine to watch sports, it's because they don't watch sports, right? They don't like sports, they don't play sports, and they're not interested in it. So they have to figure out a reason that that isn't the masculine ideal anymore. We also have this Ben Shapiro quote, the true reason so many people are angry at Jordan Peterson is because he says something true but unsayable. The sexual revolution has crippled men as well as women by depriving them of the roles and purposes that make life worth living, right? So here we have this idea that men can't actually show too much interest in women because primarily what the sexual revolution has done is given women a lot more control of their own sexuality. And that includes sleeping with multiple men. And that means men can sleep with a lot of women. But that's not the natural role that men and women are supposed to play, right? You're not supposed to desire all these women or all this stuff from them. You're supposed to just desire the one who is at home taking care of your kids and cooking you dinner, right? I'll end on this one. One of the most bizarre features of this kind of way that desire gets distorted and cut off for these kinds of men is that they start doing practices, like sexual practices that are a kind of extension of the fact that they can't desire anyone, right? They can't show too much interest in women. One of them is semen retention, which has gotten a lot of popularity lately, but it is a fairly ancient practice. Like this is not a new practice by any means. And all this is not ejaculating. So, and that includes not ejaculating in your sleep. So this is a practice of self-control, right? And in that sense, it follows the like traditionally masculine elements. It also is that kind of self-control over ejaculation is also theorized to be part of a tendency toward authoritarianism, right? That your whole body needs to be under your control at all times. So this is a post on a semen retention subreddit. And the weird part about this, right? Women shooting sexual vibes. Recently, I've been noticing that women are constantly trying to arouse me in public. I wasn't conscious of this until recently. Sometimes I would get aroused for some reason in public and wouldn't give much thought to it. But now I can consciously see girls trying to get my attention with their energy. The other day I was on the train and this girl unbuttoned her top and was hoping I would stare at her boobs and was trying to get my attention. Do women get power or energy from men fantasizing or unconsciously masturbating because of them? Any advice on how to deal with this would be appreciated from veteran retainers, because sometimes it's pretty hard to resist and go on with your day. I have only woke up to this recently. Protect your energy in public, boys. So what we're seeing here is literally the idea that sexual attraction toward women is a deliberate attempt to take men's masculinity away from them. Right? It is a way of taking the energy and strength and dominance that masculinity gives men and siphoning it off to women who ought not to have it. And we even get these like weird, right? Like, I really doubt a woman was unbuttoning her top at him on the train. Like, maybe she did, but I doubt that it was at this guy. It's possible, theoretically, I suppose. But even the idea that men are unconsciously masturbating because of these women, right? That somehow these women are getting into men's mind in a way they shouldn't be and corrupting their masculinity. And all of that can happen unconsciously, so you're not in control of any of it, right? There's a real like subversive element to that like these types of men are afraid just of the fact that women are in public effectively, right? And they can always infiltrate both your psyche by these kinds of like maneuvers to steal your energy through making you fantasize about them. But also there's a kind of like vulnerability and liability to desire itself that these men just don't want. And the reason they don't want it is because it doesn't cohere with this masculine ideal that the authoritarian man has to follow. Okay, that's the end. But I'm looking forward to your questions. I have lots of weird examples, and I'm happy to talk more about any of the elements of the talk. I can do that. Okay, there we go.
Great, thank you so much. So we have folks, we have one person joining us online and then a bunch of folks here. So if anyone has questions, comments, or wants to start the discussion, raise your hand. Yeah, Frankie.
It's not exactly a question, but just from that last slide, like the fear of women being in public and like invading the male psyche, like it does give an interesting power to women also, like in being afraid of what they will do to you. Like that is they're afraid of losing their power, but in that fear they are giving it away still.
Yeah, that's exactly right, right? So the mechanism that they do this through is obviously projection. They see women as doing something that women aren't doing. And by putting that onto women, they're yielding to those women control over themselves, right? And so they're really undermining their own standing here through this kind of activity. Either if they just see it or if they try to stop it, right? You've already given the game away that actually all these women are secretly in control, specifically of like your erotic responses and your sexual desires.
Yeah, go ahead.
This kind of just reminded me of like the rise of people being interested in Andrew Tate and like his views on life. I don't know many of them because I don't really care, but have like a reason as to like why he's so popular like right now specifically?
Yeah, so a lot of people like this are very popular right now specifically. Like I can name like dozens of men like that are like wildly popular. And I think there are a lot of theories as to why. One of them I would say actually is the fact that at least our society is undergoing a fairly significant and has been material change in gender roles, right? Women are more likely to have a college degree than men. And that means that often they will make more money than men. And that means that if someone is going to not work and stay at home with children, the economically rational thing to do would have it be a man, right? Because he makes less money because he has no college education. And we are also getting along with that a very different set of norms about what gender is and can be for people. So we're getting this like significant shift in how gender functions in our society. And we're also getting rising levels of like anti-democratic statements and like sentiments and authoritarian ones, like explicitly. And so the combination of those two things means that a lot of men are looking specifically for reaffirmation that masculinity is good, right? Because a lot of the messaging that you get through like mainstream liberal-ish types of channels is that masculinity is dangerous or bad, right? Somehow that there's like a a way of thinking about men as like inherently violent, right? And so lots of men are looking for alternate ways of like getting to understand their masculinity. And these are the places that they look for it, right? And I think it mostly depends on like what kind of guy you are, where you'll look for it. So like if you consider yourself a kind of intellectual man, you might look to Jordan Peterson. If you consider yourself a kind of ladies' man, you might look to Andrew Tate. If you're like into going to the gym, you might look at the Liver King. I don't know if anyone's really like looking at the Liver King as a masculine ideal, but I know lots of men do the Liver King stuff. And so I think that we're seeing all of these like new variations on what I would refer to as like masculinity influencers to specifically fill this desire that's generated in an authoritarian context. How do we get men to be men again, right? And that's what the Ben Shapiro tweet was about. Jordan Peterson is trying to get men to be men again. And part of that also involves getting women to be women again, right? Because what a man is someone who has this specific kind of control over women. This gets us into the cultural problem of, right? That's the like material problem. There's also this cultural problem of why all these people are so obsessed with trans people, right? Is because they need men to be men and women to be women. And they think of that as like a natural biological feature of themselves and others. And so this kind of what they would consider to be gender deviance upsets the entire structure of how they can think about themselves in a gendered world. Because in their mind, if a person they think of as a woman can be a man, well, now what does it even mean to be a man? And if a person they think of as a man actually can be a woman, does that mean that one day they might wake up and realize they are women, right? Like that's a very threatening thing for them. And so they need to undermine that at any chance they get. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answered like a lot of questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested what you think. I'm thinking about this and like just as a survivor, and it's just kind of men violence just makes me think about it. But like Me Too, it seems so surprising to me. Like finally, I feel like maybe, and it's probably the power thing too, that I don't know. I think women were finally getting like some recognition and some voices out there. And now to see like this kind of language becoming so explicit again, and so many people following people with this attitude, it seems like we're almost a response to that as well.
Yeah, good. I think that it is, right? I don't think you're wrong to think that there has been political backlash to the types of progress that women have made in addressing gender-based violence, right? There's a reason why all of a sudden you have all these men in like government talking about how actually like it shouldn't be illegal to rape your wife. Like that has been something that has come back. And honestly, it was only recently something that we got rid of as like a social norm. Like it hasn't even been gone that long. And you see a lot of these sentiments, I think, specifically coming out as a result of the overturn of Roe v. Wade as well. Like that's the most recent context you hear this in. And obviously part of this is about asserting masculine dominance, right? And as you say, this is part of a response to women's successes at being taken seriously, like testimonially taken seriously when they talk about the harms that have come to them. And part of it is about maintaining social order. So sexual violence is not just like extemporaneous violence that just like erupts out of nowhere. It's part of a pattern of maintaining certain forms of hierarchy in societies, which is how it becomes like a weapon of war specifically. We don't often think of it that way because we think of it as like an individual thing that was done to one person by another. In some ways it is. But it's also part of enforcing social systems, which is why you end up with things like corrective rape. I don't know if anyone recently saw this video that was going around of a man who followed a trans woman home and did so because he thought that he could rape her out of that behavior, specifically being trans. And that has been something that has been done to gay and lesbians historically as part of their treatment, was to be forced to have heterosexual sex. And it's part of the maintenance of domination over women and children in the household to demonstrate that actually you can be overpowered and there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no one you can call to help you for it. Right. And so the rise of that, once again, is a backlash to not just Me Too, but to the change in gender norms generally, right? We've sort of resurrected this older social tactic of keeping a populace in line. Not we, I'm not, but like these men have. Yeah.
So most of the men that I know or have met who idolize masculinity in this way don't view themselves as authoritarians. And
yeah,
them actually view themselves as like fighting against authoritarianism. So how do you fit that contradiction into this?
Good. So they see themselves as fighting against the like authoritarianism of liberals, right? Who would force them to follow like gender ideology. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, good.
In other areas, I see it in other areas too. Like these are also the same people who will parade around claiming that their free speech is being inhibited. Or I think of also Second Amendment rights.
Deeply democratic.
Yeah.
Like they're masculine.
It's different.
Idealized democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, the idealized democracy or like the
Yeah.
libertarian
Yeah.
ideology. I was doing air quotes. I don't know if you saw that.
I saw one of them. Good. These type of men are really interesting. And one of the ways that we could think about them, the three qualities of right-wing authoritarianism that I gave you from this like personality test that was developed out of the F scale. Altmaier also develops it as something that he calls left-wing authoritarianism. And what he means by that, he says specifically that before the Nazis rose to power, they were authoritarians, but they were left-wing authoritarians because they wanted to overthrow the current social order. And so you can be authoritarian insofar as you like traditionalism, you follow the leader, and you have these violent, sanctioned violence against specific others in the society. But you can do that in order to overthrow a social order that you think has unfairly usurped the proper one. And that's what Nazis did, right? There was a specific way of governing and a specific sort of way of life in Weimar Germany. And this is why you hear like Matt Walsh talking about Weimar Germany all the time now, right? Because it's this image of just like transsexual free love and pleasure seeking and like perverse arts and things like that. And the point of that is to say the people who want to overthrow the current quote unquote social order of gender ideology are participating in this authoritarianism. They're just doing it to counter what they see as the new hegemonic norm. Hard for me to believe it is a new hegemonic norm, given that just like all of the formal rights of these groups are being just like slowly eroded. And like most people don't have very progressive views on like gender or women. But there is a way of seeing that as still authoritarian, insofar as they want to return us to some kind of traditional way of following authority that we have lost, right? Does that answer your question?
That does, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, in the back.
So you say that we're seeing this rise in sort of like alpha male influencers. I would also argue that we're seeing another rise to sort of bring back to your point about like the way that trans people threat masculinity. We're also seeing this rise, I would argue, in gender critical radical feminism sort of spaces. Would you say that these two social phenomena are connected, or what do they have to do with each other? Because I just think it's interesting that they're both coming into power together.
Yeah, good. And like they have an own unholy alliance with each other, in my opinion, right? Like Matt Walsh and Kathleen Stock are like sitting pretty with each other. And it's like Matt Walsh wants to put lesbians in prison. Like you absolutely know that's something he wants to do. And he has found, a lesbian has found community with him simply on the basis that they both like think trans people should not exist, right? The way that I think about their connection to each other is that both of them are, in their own ways, deeply invested in the naturalness and necessity of gender roles in a certain way. The like masculinity influencers are interested in the naturalness of masculinity in order just to affirm their own masculinity, right? Like that's what they're trying to get out of it, is like, this is good and right because it's how I am. And any deviation from that would be bad and wrong because it contravenes my nature. The anti-trans radical feminists are doing a version of that on themselves, right? That what they say is there is no such thing as gender, there's only sex, but that gives certain kinds of naturalness and necessity to what you are, in a way that if you contravene it, again, you're doing something unnatural, or you're trying to pervert this sort of necessary feature about yourself, right? And so that's why they'll refer to like any like gender affirmative medical care or surgery as forms of mutilation, right? Because they think, no, your body is naturally and therefore should necessarily be that way. And to do anything else to it, in their theory, is to like pervert it to do gender differently. I had another point that I wanted to get out of that. Oh, here's what it is. One of the things about these, specifically the lesbians who engage in these kind of anti-trans practices, a lot of them also hold deeply conservative views about gender roles. Lots of them have religious views about gender roles. Like specifically, Kathleen Stock thinks that women should be subservient to their husbands because that's how the Christian household is designed. It just so happens she doesn't have a husband, so she doesn't have to be subservient to him anymore. And the other way that they do this is by saying like, well, you know, why can't you just like be a feminine man, or why can't you just be a masculine woman? But then if they see a commercial of a boy wearing a dress, like playing dress up, they all lose their minds over it. And it's like, hold on, I thought that was what you wanted them to do. Right? You said like, so long as you don't do any of the body mutilation, quote unquote, you're fine. But then it turns out once you stop that, the logic just moves on to the next best thing, right?
Yep, Elliot.
One thing I'm wondering about is like the rise of QAnon. I think one of the big things I see there is this idea that you should be protecting your family from something. So here's this like manufactured target that doesn't exist. It's often really extreme.
Yeah, good. I think this taps into a couple of things that are happening. One of which is that part of the reason why children are at risk is because we don't have the traditional household anymore, right? Where the man goes out to work, he serves as a protector for his wife and children, and he controls everything that they do and are subjected to. Women don't stay at home anymore to raise their children. And that means that children are influenced in schools, right? And this is part of the like big focus on the idea of schools teaching anything about gender, is that, well, children should learn that at home, but they can't learn that at home because their wives all work, right? All these mothers work. And so you have this kind of serious problem where children are being influenced in ways that they wouldn't have been if we maintained the traditional familial structure, like the bourgeois family. And my favorite, I don't know if you know about these specific QAnon people, are the transvestigators.
so entertaining.
I was gonna say I'm glad you all know about this, but I'm really not. I wish that it didn't exist, right? But this is another outpouring of that, is like part of protecting yourself is being afraid of everything, right? That there could be like secret danger lurking around every corner. And you see the reflection of the semen retainer guy in the last slide in them as well, is that out of a desire to be so self-protective, you actually like are admitting how weak you are, how vulnerable you are, and how afraid of the world you are, right? And like, that's not like very manly. Like, what, you're afraid that like you'll accidentally talk to a trans woman and like you might touch her? Like, what's she gonna do to you, bro? Like, you're a man, what are you afraid of? But right, you see the exact same pattern repeat in the kind of conspiracy theory nuttiness about children at schools and about like gender broadly.
I'm like really interested in the way that like these like hyper masculine ideals are all predicated on this fear of being out of control, and kind of the way that like the material aspect of that is like you just like the traditional like 1950s man could control his environment because he had like opportunities to like find like a stable job and employment and this access to like a material income that provided the ability to control your entire environment. And so I think it's really interesting the way that like the destabilization of like the economy and like the housing market and the job market like creates these material outside influence that take away this control. But the social ideal is that jobs are still available and everyone should have them. So like these authoritarian hypermasculine men like are praising this type of government system that is actually the cause of their fear and their instability and their loss of control, and like that lack of like conscious recognition of that is just deeply interesting.
Yeah, so I think that part of that, like what you're talking about, is true. And part of what happens is this is why they get attracted to like authoritarian figures. Because one of the things that like the Donald Trumps and the Ron DeSantises of the world promise is that we're going to recenter men, right? We are going to get men good jobs. We're going to do it by kicking out all the immigrants who have taken men's jobs, quote unquote. We're going to restore masculinity to men. And so they'll get the masculine jobs back, and we'll take them away from undeserving people who only got their jobs through affirmative action, right? All this diversity stuff is the reason that men have been unseated as an economic superpower in the House. And I've even seen some Congress people talk about eliminating no-fault divorces, right? So that women literally can't get out from under the thumb of men again, right? Because no-fault divorces were one of the material changes that destabilized that. But yeah, that's exactly right.
So we've run out of time. Let's thank Nathan for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you all. It was a really nice conversation.
And next week, we have our own Rebecca Rosinski from the Classics Department, The Ancient and Modern Metamorphoses of Daphne, Myth as Examination, Critique, and Transformation. Dr. Rosinski talking about the Apollo Daphne story and how it throughout history and art and in theater and in film explore, and she'll talk about gender-based hierarchy, sexual menace, and compulsory heterosexuality next week, 4 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Yeah.